A boy watches his mother get shot by a firing squad. 6 bullets. She drops. The boy is 13 years old. He stands in a crowd of prisoners forced to watch. And the only thing he feels, the only thing that registers anywhere inside his body, is irritation. Because the execution is making him late for dinner. He doesn't cry that night. He doesn't cry that week. He doesn't cry for the next 15 years. Not because he's suppressing something. Not because he's brave or broken or in shock. But because there is nothing inside him that knows what crying is for. He will learn. Years later, in a free country, in a warm room, someone will explain to him what the word mother is supposed to mean. And he will understand. And the understanding will be worse than everything that came before it. For the first 23 years of his life, Shin Dong-hyuk did not know the world had an outside. Not a figure of speech. He was born in 1982 inside Camp 14, a total control zone in the mountains of North Korea. The fence was electrified. The perimeter ran for miles, and every single person inside it, from the oldest prisoner to the newest infant, had been sentenced to die there. No release date, no parole, no appeal. Shin's crime was being born. His grandparents had defected to the South during the Korean War. 3 generations of punishment. That was the policy. Your grandfather fled, so you, his grandchild, born decades later, will spend your entire life in a labor camp. But the worst part of Camp 14 wasn't the punishment. It was the absence. There were no birthdays, no bedtime stories. No one ever spoke his name softly in the dark. The word love existed in the Korean language, but it carried no meaning inside those fences. Not because it was forbidden, because there was nothing for it to describe. His parents weren't parents. Guards paired his mother and father as a reward. His father operated a metal lathe. He was good at it. So the guards gave him a woman, 5 conjugal visits a year. That's how children were manufactured in Camp 14. Not families,
Not
production.
families.
His father lived in a separate dormitory,
Production.
visited a few times a year. The word father was a scheduling arrangement. His mother lived closer, but Shin didn't think of her as a mother. He had one word for her, and it wasn't Korean for mom. It was closer to competitor. A competitor for food. 600 calories a day. That's what they ate. 1 Big Mac for 24 hours. Shin found corn kernels in cow dung, washed them off, ate them. It was the best meal he'd had in weeks. At his first public speech after escaping, years later, at Osan Air Base, he'd say, "There's a word, slave. There's a word, animal." Yet even animals on the camps lived a better life than we did. The guards who owned the dogs and cats in the camp fed them better than we were fed. His first memory was formed at age 5, a public execution. Prisoners lined up, gunfire, a body falling. This was not trauma. This was curriculum. This was how children learned the rules. There was a girl in his school, 6 years old. She found food on the ground and brought it to class. The teacher discovered it during a contraband search. He beat her with a wooden stick until she was unconscious. Shin and his classmates went to check on her the next day. Her mother told them she'd been executed. Shin described the teacher's face, not with horror, not with anger, with the flat precision of someone describing weather. It wasn't angry, his face, but he looked like a man trying to kill her. That sentence tells you everything. Not what was done to these children, what was never given to them. The observation is perfect, clinical, accurate, and completely empty of feeling. There were no portraits of Kim Il-sung on the walls, no propaganda posters, no patriotic songs. In the rest of North Korea, the personality cult reaches into every home, every school, every dream. But not Camp 14. These prisoners weren't citizens. They weren't even subjects. They were below propaganda. The regime didn't bother telling them a story about the world, because for them, there was no world. Just the fence and what was inside it. And inside it, a boy was growing up exactly as designed. A boy who could watch a man die and describe the killer's face without flinching. A boy who could eat corn from cow dung and call it a good day. A boy who looked at his mother and saw someone standing between him and food. The system was working perfectly. Camp 14 had 10 rules. Children learned them the way other children learn the alphabet. Rule number 1. Do not try to escape. Violators will be shot. Rule number 10. Anyone who witnesses an attempted escape and does not report it will be shot. The rules didn't distinguish between strangers and family. There was no exception for your mother. Reporting wasn't betrayal in Camp 14. Reporting was loyalty, the only kind that existed. Children reported parents. Parents reported children. Friends reported friends. The system didn't just permit this, it required it. It was the architecture, and for 23 years, it produced exactly the output it was designed to produce. In 1996, Shin overheard something. His mother and his brother were talking, planning. His brother had been speaking to their mother in secret. There was rice being prepared, a symbol of wealth in North Korea, even inside the camps. An escape was being planned. Shin reported them. And here's where the story seems simple. A child, raised inside a machine that teaches reporting as survival, does what the machine taught him. He doesn't know another way. He's never been shown one. You can understand it. You can almost forgive it. But that's not the whole story. Years later, Shin admitted what actually triggered the report. It wasn't obedience. It wasn't the 10 rules recited in his head like a reflex. It was something much smaller and much worse. His brother was getting rice, and he wasn't. Jealousy. That was the catalyst. A 13-year-old boy reported his mother's escape plan, sent her to a firing squad because his brother was eating rice and he was hungry. Sit with that for a moment. Because jealousy is a feeling, he did feel something. The camp hadn't erased every emotion. It had selected the useful ones. Hunger, envy, self-preservation. Those survived. Those were cultivated. And everything else, love, loyalty, grief, mercy, was amputated. Not through surgery, through absence. You can't miss what you've never had. The system didn't break him, it built him. And it built him to do exactly this. Then came the obscenity. The system that taught Shin to report punished him for reporting. The school night guard who received the information took full credit for discovering the escape plan. Shin got nothing. Worse than nothing. He was dragged underground. Guards lit a charcoal fire beneath his back. They forced a metal hook through his skin so he couldn't struggle. He hung there, a child, over burning coals, while the men who taught him to inform tortured him for informing. The scars are still on his body. You can see them. Decades later, raised and rippled and permanent. His finger, part of his right middle finger, was cut off by a supervisor. Not for the betrayal, for accidentally breaking a sewing machine. That's how Camp 14 distributed mutilation. Casually, like filing paperwork. And then they made him watch. November 1996. The prisoners were assembled. Shin's mother and brother stood in front of the firing squad. The shots came. They fell. And Shin Dong-hyuk felt nothing. Not suppressed grief, not hidden rage, not shock that would surface later. Nothing. The circuitry for grief had never been installed. There was no wire to carry the signal. There was no signal to send. He watched the woman he'd reported die, and the only thing that moved through his body was the dull awareness that the day was getting late, and he hadn't eaten. The camp made him do the worst thing a son can do. Then, it made sure he couldn't feel it. That was the design. That was the product. A boy who could betray his mother over rice, watch her die, and walk to dinner. Then Park arrived. He was a new prisoner, transferred in, and he was different from anyone Shin had ever encountered because Park had been outside. He'd lived in Pyongyang. He'd traveled to China. He carried something no one inside Camp 14 had ever heard before, a description of the world beyond the fence. Park talked about food, grilled chicken, pork, beef, white rice, noodles. He described meals the way a poet describes sunsets, with color and heat and texture. And Shin listened the way a man dying of thirst watches rain through a window. This is important. Shin did not want freedom. He had no concept of freedom. Freedom is an abstraction, and abstractions require a world to stand on. Shin had no world. He had Camp 14. What Shin wanted was a full stomach. His own words, "I thought that even if I were to die tonight, as long as I died with a full stomach, having eaten what I wanted, it would be worth getting killed." And later, that desire to eat, that freedom to eat whatever I wanted to eat, was what compelled me to escape. The most important decision of his life was driven by the same force that made him betray his mother. Hunger. Not hope, not courage, not the human spirit soaring toward liberty. Hunger. The one feeling the camp gave him, and the one feeling that followed him out. January 2005. Shin and Park made their attempt. They ran toward the fence, electrified. Shin had lived inside Camp 14 his entire life. He knew what that fence could do. He'd seen it. He'd been warned about it since childhood. The electricity running through those wires was part of his earliest education. Park was a transferred prisoner. He hadn't grown up here. He didn't know the fence the way Shin knew it. Park reached the fence first. The current killed him. His body seized and collapsed against the wires. Park, the man who told Shin about grilled chicken, the man who planted the idea that the world had flavor, died on the metal that separated the camp from everything he'd described. Shin's legs got caught in the wire. The electricity burned him. But Park's body, pressed against the lower cables, absorbed part of the current. Shin crawled over him, over the man who gave him the only reason he'd ever had to live. He used the body as insulation and pulled himself through. The scars from the electric fence are still on his legs. Now let the question form on its own. Shin grew up inside Camp 14. He knew the fence was electrified. Park didn't. Shin let Park reach the fence first. Did he know what would happen? Did he use the one person who ever showed him an alternative world as a tool to reach it? I'm not going to answer that. Neither did Shin. Not clearly. Not in any version of the story. If you're looking for a verdict, consider this. The question itself assumes a moral framework. It assumes Shin understood that another person's life had value, that letting someone walk into death is a choice with weight. But in January 2005, standing at that fence, Shin Dong-hyuk had never been taught that another person's life meant anything at all. He ran, through the snow, into China, eventually to South Korea. He was out. If this case is gripping you, take a second to subscribe. I cover stories like this, stories that don't leave your head, every week. Shin described the outside world in a single word: heaven. People walking around freely, wearing whatever clothes they like, laughing and singing. Heaven. And he was standing in it, like a man who had never been taught what air was for. South Korea. Shin is free, and he is completely, profoundly lost. Not geographically, emotionally. He doesn't understand kindness. He doesn't understand why people smile at strangers. He doesn't understand why someone would give him food without expecting labor in return. The entire social grammar of human warmth, the stuff people absorb in infancy before memory even begins, is foreign to him. He's 23 years old, and he's encountering basic human decency for the first time. And he doesn't enjoy freedom. Not really. He enjoys food. One observer put it simply, he doesn't even enjoy freedom. He only enjoys food. The one feeling Camp 14 gave him, hunger, was the only one that survived the fence. But slowly, over months, over years, something begins to happen. Through therapy, through human contact, through the simple accumulated evidence of watching people love each other, mothers kneeling to wipe food from a child's face, fathers lifting daughters onto their shoulders, strangers holding doors open for no reason, Shin begins to acquire what was never given to him. Not information, feeling. He learns what mother means to other people, not food competitor, not the woman who was executed. Mother, as in the person who would have died for you. The person you were supposed to love more than food, more than rice, more than survival itself. He learns what guilt is, not as a word, as a sensation, a physical thing that takes residence in the chest and refuses to leave. Something heavy and hot that sits behind the sternum at 3 in the morning and won't let you sleep. And then it arrives. All of it. Not as a new memory. He always had the memories. He remembered reporting his mother. He remembered the firing squad. He remembered walking to dinner afterward. The footage was always there. What arrived was the meaning. He reported his mother. She died. He was jealous of Rice. She was shot in front of him. He watched. He felt nothing. He went to look for dinner. And now, years later, in a free country, with no guards and no fences and no rules, Shin Dong-hyuk cries. He cries for a woman who has been dead for more than a decade. Not because he just remembered her, because he just learned how. When he finally acquired human feelings, he cried over his lack of awareness of morality growing up. Not over the torture, not over the fire beneath his back, not over the hook forced through his skin or the finger cut from his hand. Over his own absence, over the void where feeling should have been. Over 23 years of walking through the world without the nerve endings to register what it was doing to him. This is the cruelest thing Camp 14 ever did. It didn't make him suffer. It made him incapable of suffering. And then the world outside, the free world, the warm world, the world full of mothers wiping food from children's faces, gave him the capacity. And 23 years of unlived grief arrived like a flood in a house with no foundation. Shin began speaking publicly. He told his story to audiences in South Korea, in the United States, at the United Nations. The book, Escape from Camp 14, written by journalist Blaine Harden, was translated into 27 languages. Shin became a symbol, a voice, a face for the estimated 130,000 people still inside those fences. But inside, something was fracturing. The story he was telling, the clean version, the version in the book, the version audiences applauded, was not exactly true. And the reason it wasn't true was about to reveal something more important than any fact he'd gotten wrong. In 2015, Shin admitted to Blaine Harden that key details of his story were wrong. He wasn't in Camp 14 his entire life. He'd been transferred to Camp 18 at age 6. The torture he said happened at 13 actually happened at 20. He said his father was dead. His father was alive. North Korea released video proving it. The man on camera, Shin's father, saying his son had never been in a labor camp. The world reacted the way the world reacts. Some called Shin a fraud. North Korean propaganda seized on it. Critics questioned everything. If he lied about his age during the torture, about his father's death, about which camp he was in. What else? Where does rearranging end and fabrication begin? Blaine Hardin's response was precise. From a human rights perspective, he was still brutally tortured. But he moved things around. The scars on his back are real. The missing finger is real. The burns from the charcoal fire are real. Park's body on the fence is real. The electric scars on his legs are real. What changed were dates, locations, sequences. He compressed 2 camps into one. He shifted his age. He killed off his father in the telling. Why? Shin's own words. He was very sorry and wanted to conceal and hide part of his painful past. Conceal and hide. 2 quiet words, and they carry the weight of the entire story. Think about what concealing requires. It requires shame. A person who feels no shame doesn't rearrange their history. A person raised in Camp 14, where reporting your mother earned you nothing, where survival was the only value, where there was no self-image to protect because you were never given one. That person doesn't bother hiding anything. Hiding implies you care how you're seen. It implies there is a version of yourself you want the world to believe in. It implies a conscience. Shin lied because he had developed the capacity for shame. The camp couldn't give him that. The camp was designed to prevent exactly that. But freedom did. Slowly, painfully, imperfectly, living among people who feel things gave Shin the machinery to feel things too. And one of the first things that machinery produced was shame about his own past. The lying isn't evidence against his story. It's evidence that he'd become a different person from the one who lived it. The boy who watched his mother die and walked to dinner doesn't rearrange anything. He has nothing to protect. But the man Shin became, the man with a conscience, with guilt, with the crushing weight of understanding what he'd done, that man needs a cleaner past than the one he actually lived. Some critics said the recantation actually strengthens his credibility. A man who was taught nothing about morality, learning to feel shame about his own history. That's not the behavior of a con artist. That's the behavior of someone being rebuilt from the inside. Badly, painfully, with pieces that don't quite fit. The lies are the scar tissue of a conscience forming. Ugly, misshapen, but proof that something underneath is trying to heal. It's been 20 years since the fence. Shin Dong-hyuk lives in South Korea. He works as an activist and journalist. He gives speeches. He sits across from interviewers and tells versions of his story, revised, corrected, updated to anyone who will listen. He advocates for the people still inside the camps, and he carries something that no guard ever put on his body. The guards at Camp 14 cut off part of his finger. They hung him from a hook over burning coals. They starved him to 600 calories a day. They killed his mother in front of him. And none of it, not one moment of it, was the worst thing they did to him. Because for all of that, he felt nothing. No pain that lasted past the nerve endings. No grief that kept him up at night. No guilt that ate through his chest like acid. The camp was efficient that way. It took everything from him. And because it also took the ability to know what was taken, it almost didn't matter. You can't mourn what you can't name. You can't grieve a love you were never taught to feel. The worst thing happened years later. It happened in a warm room, in a free country, when someone explained to Shin Dong-hyuk what a mother is supposed to mean. What it means when she bends down to wipe food from your face. What it means when she says your name in the dark. What it costs her to keep you alive. What it would cost you to lose her. And he understood, and the understanding was worse than everything that came before it combined. Because now he had the nerve endings. Now he had the circuitry. Now he could feel what a 13-year-old boy should have felt when he watched his mother fall to 6 bullets in a prison yard. And that feeling, arriving 15 years late, with no warning, with no way to send it back, didn't liberate him. It crushed him. It rewrote every memory he had, stamped each one with a meaning it never carried before, and handed him a grief so large he had no experience to hold it. Camp 14 made him numb. The world made him feel. And feeling, after a lifetime of nothing, turned out to be the cruelest thing of all. If this story changed how you think about what suffering really is, share it with someone. Not for the algorithm, because some questions deserve to be carried by more than one person.